The store was buzzing with life, shoppers walking through the aisles, employees arranging shelves, and the faint hum of background music filling the air. To everyone else, it was just another ordinary day. But hidden in the rhythm of the store, a storm was quietly waiting to unfold, one that no one could have predicted. In the middle of the crowd walked a woman who didn't look like anyone special. She carried herself with quiet grace, her eyes calm but observant, as though she noticed everything. Dressed simply, she seemed like an ordinary customer who had come to browse. None of the workers knew her name. None realized that this woman wasn't just another shopper, she was the heartbeat of this entire place. She was the CEO, the very owner of the store. Yet she chose to keep her identity hidden. She wanted to see how her staff treated customers when no one was watching. She wanted to learn if the values she had built the company on, respect, honesty, and kindness, were alive in the daily grind of her business. Today was supposed to be an ordinary check. But fate had something else planned. At the front counter stood a man who had recently been promoted as the new store manager. He wore his suit like a badge of power, his chin lifted slightly higher than necessary, and his eyes carried the sharpness of arrogance. To him, authority wasn't a responsibility, it was a weapon. He enjoyed the way employees stiffened when he passed by, and he relished the subtle fear he commanded. The woman noticed him right away. His tone was curt, his movements sharp, and he rarely smiled at customers. Something about his energy unsettled her, but she chose not to judge too quickly. She believed in fairness. Everyone deserved a chance to show who they truly were. As she walked to the counter with a small purchase, the air shifted. The manager's eyes flicked to her, narrowing slightly. He didn't recognize her, of course, but the way he looked at her carried an edge, like someone who had already decided for her without even speaking a word. "Excuse me?" she said softly, placing her items on the counter. Instead of greeting her, the manager sighed as though she were an inconvenience. "If you want this," he said coldly, "you'll need to wait. I'm busy with something more important." The shoppers nearby looked up. His tone wasn't just impatient, it was dismissive. The woman remained calm, her expression unchanged. She wasn't there to argue. She wanted to see how far this would go, how the man in charge treated someone he believed had no influence. Minutes ticked by, and the line behind her grew restless. Yet the manager ignored her, continuing his paperwork and making small, unnecessary adjustments to the counter, as if proving that his time was far more valuable than hers. Finally, she spoke again, her voice steady but polite. "Sir, I only have these 2 items. Could you please check me out quickly? I wouldn't want to keep the other customers waiting." The manager turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing with irritation. His voice dropped, laced with sharpness. "I said you'll wait. Do you not understand?" Gasps rose from a few customers standing nearby. The arrogance in his tone was shocking, even uncomfortable. The employees behind him exchanged nervous glances, but none dared to intervene. The woman's eyes didn't waver. She stood tall, calm as ever, her silence carrying a weight heavier than words. She wasn't just another customer. She was observing every detail. But to him, she was no one. The tension in the store grew thick, pressing down on everyone who watched. Something was building, and though no one knew exactly what, they could feel it. The woman finally took a slow breath. "Respect is a choice," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. The manager scoffed, mistaking her calmness for weakness. He leaned closer, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "In this store, I decide who gets respect, and right now, it isn't you." His words echoed across the room, leaving an uncomfortable silence in their wake. The shoppers froze, their eyes darting between the woman and the man, sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. The woman's expression remained unchanged, but her eyes, calm, steady, and unshaken, seemed to hold a secret no one else could see. The storm hadn't broken yet, but everyone could feel it was only a matter of time. The silence in the store lingered like heavy fog. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. The manager's harsh words had cut through the air, leaving customers stunned and employees paralyzed. Still, the woman at the counter stood with the same quiet dignity as before. She didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, and didn't back down. The manager smirked, mistaking her stillness for surrender. To him, she was just another customer, someone powerless in his world of authority. He had worked hard to climb into this position, and now he wore his role like a crown. In his mind, no ordinary shopper could challenge him. But what he didn't realize was that his crown was already slipping. The woman reached into her bag, slowly placing a receipt from a previous visit on the counter. "I believe there's an error here," she said calmly, her tone professional and even. "I'd appreciate it if you could take a look." The manager barely glanced at it. He shoved the paper back toward her with a flick of his hand. "Not my problem," he muttered. "You people always complain about something." Gasps rippled through the small crowd. His words weren't just rude, they carried a sting that everyone felt. The employees shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uneasy looks. A few customers even whispered among themselves, unable to believe how casually he had dismissed her. The woman didn't react. Her calmness wasn't weakness, it was control. Inside, she felt the sting of his words, but she refused to show it. She wanted to see how far he would go, how much of himself he would reveal before the truth turned against him. The line of waiting customers grew restless. A mother with 2 children shuffled nervously. An elderly man cleared his throat, clearly, uncomfortable with the manager's behavior. Yet the manager ignored them all, puffing his chest as though the store existed only to serve his authority. Finally, one of the employees, a young cashier, stepped forward timidly. "Sir," she whispered, "maybe we should help her." "The line is—" The manager cut her off with a sharp glare. "Back to your station," he snapped. "Do not interrupt me again." The young cashier shrank back, her face flushing with embarrassment. The woman at the counter, however, noticed her bravery. The way she had tried to step in, even knowing the risks, spoke volumes. The woman turned back to the manager, her eyes steady. "Every business is built on respect," she said softly. "Not just for the customers, but for the employees, too." The manager barked a laugh. "Spare me the lectures. You don't run this place. I do." His arrogance filled the air like smoke, suffocating everyone around him. Still, the woman remained steady, refusing to meet aggression with anger. She simply observed, her silence more powerful than words. The crowd began to sense that something was unusual about her. There was a quiet authority in the way she stood, in the way she didn't falter. Whispers spread among the customers. Who is she? Why isn't she walking away? Why does she look so certain even when being humiliated? The woman finally picked up her receipt again, folding it carefully. "Thank you for your time," she said, though her tone carried a depth the manager failed to recognize. She turned slightly as if to leave, but paused. Her gaze swept across the employees, lingering for a moment on the young cashier who had tried to help. Then her eyes returned to the manager. "You should be very careful," she said softly, almost like a warning. The words unsettled him, though he masked it with another scoff. "Careful?" he sneered. "Lady, the only person who should be careful is you. People like me run this place. People like you should just do as you're told." The silence that followed was heavier than before. It was no longer just rudeness. It was an abuse of power, a blatant display of arrogance in front of everyone. The shoppers felt it. The employees felt it. And deep down, the manager himself felt it too. But the woman didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply let his words hang in the air, exposing him more effectively than any confrontation could. The more he spoke, the more he revealed his own downfall. Behind the counter, one of the senior staff members had entered the store. She stopped in her tracks, eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. She recognized the woman immediately. Her heart raced, but she said nothing, watching carefully. She knew what was coming, and she knew the manager had no idea how close he stood to losing everything. The woman quietly adjusted her bag on her shoulder. Her eyes locked with the senior staff member for the briefest second. A silent understanding passed between them. Then, with calm composure, she turned back to the manager. 7 minutes, she said quietly, her words measured and deliberate. The manager frowned. 7 minutes for what? She did not answer, only a faint smile that unsettled him more than any argument could. The crowd shifted, sensing that her words carried a meaning far deeper than they understood. The tension grew thicker, the clock ticking forward. Each second felt like a countdown to something inevitable. The woman stood silently, waiting. Fa-wee. Employees grew anxious, the customers restless, and the manager, though he didn't admit it, felt a strange unease creeping over him. Something was about to happen. Everyone could feel it, and for the first time, the manager's arrogance began to waver. The murmur of voices swelled through the store. Customers whispered among themselves, employees exchanged uneasy glances, and the air felt thick with tension. The manager stood tall, but his confidence was beginning to show cracks. Something about the woman's calm composure unsettled him. Her words, 7 minutes, kept echoing in his mind like an unseen countdown. He tried to shake it off. Ridiculous, he muttered under his breath. She's just another customer, nothing more. But his eyes darted to the clock on the wall anyway. The woman remained silent, her gaze steady, her hands folded neatly over her bag. She wasn't angry. She wasn't frightened. She simply waited, as though she knew time itself was on her side. That quiet certainty was more intimidating than any outburst could have been. The crowd sensed it too, even those who didn't understand. What was happening could feel the balance of power shifting, slowly but surely. The manager slammed his hand down on the counter, forcing a laugh that sounded harsher than intended. Enough games. If you don't like the service here, leave. Simple as that. I don't have time for nonsense. The woman tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Time is all you have left, she replied softly. The words struck him deeper than he expected. His smirk faltered, though he quickly masked it with another show of arrogance. Big words from someone with no authority. Do you think I care about your opinion? A customer from the back of the line couldn't hold back any longer. Sir, with all due respect, you're being unfair. She hasn't done anything wrong. Others nodded in agreement, their voices rising in quiet support. The manager's face flushed with anger. Stay out of it, he barked. I run this store and you— He jabbed a finger toward the woman. You don't belong here. The room fell silent again. The weight of his words hung in the air like smoke. It wasn't just rude anymore, it was cruel, and everyone knew it. But the woman's composure didn't break. She simply lifted her eyes, her calmness cutting sharper than any blade. When leaders misuse power, she said softly, it isn't just themselves they damage. It's everyone around them. Her. Words pierced the silence. Customers shifted uncomfortably. Employees lowered their eyes, ashamed, yet afraid. The young cashier from earlier clenched her fists, tears welling in her eyes as she watched the situation spiral. The manager scoffed again, but his voice wavered ever so slightly. He turned away, muttering under his breath, but even that felt forced. It was then that the senior staff member, who had been watching quietly from the sidelines, took a cautious step forward. Her eyes met the woman's for a moment, a flash of recognition, a silent plea for permission. But the woman gave no signal, only a faint, steady look that seemed to say, wait. The minutes ticked on. The manager grew restless, pacing behind the counter. You think standing there quietly makes you powerful? You're wasting everyone's time. The woman finally spoke again, her tone firm but calm. Respect isn't wasted time, and soon you'll understand why. The whisper of her words seemed to ripple through the room, sparking even more confusion among the customers. Who was this woman? Why was she so calm in the face of such humiliation? And why did her presence feel so commanding? The manager rolled his eyes, but the unease gnawing at him grew stronger. He checked the clock again. Almost 5 minutes had passed since her mysterious warning. His palms grew damp, though he clenched his fists to hide it. The senior staff member could no longer contain herself. She stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. Sir, she said carefully, maybe it would be wise to— He cut her off with a sharp glare. Don't you dare question me! I've been running this place perfectly well without your interference. But this time the senior staff member didn't back down completely. Her eyes flicked to the woman again, and in that silent exchange, courage sparked. The woman adjusted her stance slightly, still poised, still patient. The seconds ticked closer to the end of her 7-minute warning. The atmosphere in the store had shifted completely. What had begun as arrogance now felt like the edge of a revelation. Everyone could sense it, even the manager, though he fought to deny it. The woman's voice broke the silence once more, low but steady. A leader who disrespects the very people he's meant to serve has already failed, and failure always finds its way to the surface. The manager's laugh this time was hollow. And who are you to decide what leadership is? The woman's eyes softened, but her words carried the weight of truth. Someone who built this place with her own hands. Someone who knows that respect is not given because of a title, it's earned by how you treat others. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The whispers grew louder, spreading like fire. Did she say she built this place? What does that mean? Who is she really? The manager froze, his eyes widening slightly as the possibility crept into his mind. No, it couldn't be. Could it? The clock struck 7 minutes. The woman straightened, her calm composure now tinged with quiet authority. The senior staff member finally stepped beside her, her voice clear and unwavering. "Sir, do you realize who you've been speaking to?" The color drained from the manager's face. The revelation had begun. The manager's chest tightened as the words of the senior staff member echoed in his ears. "Do you realize who you've been speaking to?" The room had fallen silent again, so quiet that even the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed louder than before. The customers leaned forward, eyes wide with curiosity, while the employees stood, frozen, afraid to breathe too loudly. Everyone sensed that the moment they had been waiting for was finally here, the moment when the calm woman's identity would no longer be hidden. The manager forced a laugh, though it rang hollow. "What nonsense is this? She's just a customer. Don't tell me you're all fooled by her little act." But his words lacked the confidence they once carried. His voice cracked, and his eyes darted nervously toward the woman, searching for a sign, for proof that his authority was still intact. The woman didn't move. She stood exactly as she had before, her composure as steady as stone, but now her silence felt heavier, stronger. It was no longer the silence of patience. It was the silence of power. The senior staff member took another step forward, her voice trembling slightly, but filled with conviction. "Sir, I know exactly who she is, and if you had paid attention to the very values this company was built on, you would have recognized her too." The crowd erupted into whispers. Customers exchanged confused glances, some covering their mouths in shock. Who could she be? They wondered. "What is happening?" The manager's throat went dry. "Enough of this drama," he snapped, his desperation leaking into every word. "I run this store, I make the rules, and no outsider is going to tell me otherwise." The woman finally raised her eyes to meet his, her calm gaze locking him in place. When she spoke, her voice was soft, yet it cut through the tension like lightning. "An outsider?" she said. "That's an interesting choice of words for someone who doesn't even realize he's standing in a place I built." Gasps rippled across the room. Customers froze mid-breath. Employees stiffened, their eyes wide. The manager blinked rapidly, his face paling as the meaning of her words sank in. But still, he fought against it. "You're lying," he stammered. "You're bluffing. People like you don't—" He stopped himself, realizing too late how dangerous his words had become. The woman didn't flinch. She took one deliberate step closer, her voice calm but unshakably firm. "Do you know what true leadership looks like?" she asked. "It is not about power. It is not about titles. It is about respect, integrity, and the way you treat the people around you. And in every moment I have watched you today, you have shown the opposite." The customers nodded in agreement, their eyes fixed on her. The employees seemed almost relieved, as if someone had finally put words to the truth they had been too afraid to speak. The manager shook his head, trying desperately to regain control. "You're making a mistake," he spat. "You think you can just walk in here and reveal myself?" the woman interrupted gently. "Yes, that is exactly what I can do." The weight of her words was undeniable. It settled on the crowd like thunder rolling in the distance, promising a storm. The senior staff member, her voice clear and unwavering now, stepped beside the woman. "Sir," she said firmly, "you have just insulted, humiliated, and dismissed the very person who signs your paycheck. This woman is not just a customer. She is the CEO of this company." The store erupted. Customers gasped, some covering their mouths in shock. Employees stared wide-eyed, disbelief etched on their faces. The whispers that had been building all afternoon turned into a roar of astonishment. The manager staggered back, his face drained of color. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible. She can't be—" But deep down, he already knew. It was true. The authority in her gaze, the calmness in her voice, the unshakable dignity she had held from the very beginning, it all made sense now. He had been blind to it, blinded by his own arrogance. The woman didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply looked at him with the same steady eyes she had worn all along. "You see," she said softly, "the test of a leader is not how he behaves when he knows someone is watching. It's how he behaves when he believes no one is." The words cut through him like a blade. His knees felt weak, his hands trembled. The crowd's eyes bore down on him, not with admiration, but with disgust. The same people he had commanded with. Arrogance now looked at him with pity, or worse, with contempt. The senior staff member turned to the woman, her tone respectful. "Madam, what would you like us to do?" The manager's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to speak, to plead, to explain himself. But the words caught in his throat. For the first time since he had taken the position, he realized he wasn't the one in control. The woman didn't answer right away. She let the silence linger, her eyes still on the man who had belittled her so cruelly. Finally, she spoke with quiet finality. "Justice doesn't need noise," she said. "It only needs truth." And with that, the turning point had come. The arrogance of the manager had been exposed, the truth of the woman revealed, and the balance of power had shifted completely. What remained was only the decision, one that would determine the manager's fate in front of everyone who had witnessed his downfall. The words struck like thunder. She is the CEO of this company. The store had never been so quiet. Every customer, every employee, every bystander froze in place, their eyes wide, their jaws slack. For a long moment, even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. The manager, once standing tall and proud, suddenly looked small, like a tower crumbling from within. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stammered, his lips trembling, his face drained of its arrogant flush. "No, that can't be true," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "She's lying. She has to be lying." But deep down, he knew it wasn't a lie. Every detail now fell into place. Her calm authority, the confidence in her eyes, the way she never bowed under pressure. She hadn't been afraid because she had no reason to fear him. All along, she had been testing him, watching him. The woman stood with quiet dignity, her expression unchanged. She didn't need to raise her voice or prove herself with grand gestures. Her presence was enough, thought. Senior staff member spoke again, her voice strong and clear. "I have seen her at the headquarters. I have stood in meetings where her vision shaped the company's future. And today she walked into this store to see if the values she built were alive here. You have answered that question for her." Gasps rippled across the room. Customers exchanged looks of shock, some even shaking their heads in disbelief. One whispered to another, "All this time, and he treated her like that?" The employees looked at each other with shame written on their faces. They had witnessed the manager's arrogance for weeks, but none of them had dared to stand against him. Now the truth was out, and guilt pressed heavily on their shoulders. The manager's knees felt weak. He gripped the edge of the counter to steady himself, sweat forming at his brow. "Please," he muttered, his voice shaking. This is a misunderstanding." The woman finally spoke, her voice calm but laced with quiet authority. "A misunderstanding ends when someone apologizes. What you displayed here was not confusion. It was contempt. Contempt for me, for your employees, and for the very customers who keep this business alive." Her words echoed like a verdict. "The key." Crowd began to murmur again, this time not in confusion but in judgment. They looked at the manager with narrowed eyes, their sympathy long gone. His arrogance had been laid bare, and now he stood alone in the wreckage of his pride. He took a trembling step forward, his tone suddenly desperate. "Madam, I didn't know. If I had known who you were, I never—" The woman raised a hand, silencing him. "That is exactly the problem," she interrupted. "Respect should not depend on who someone is. It should be given freely, because every person who walks through these doors deserves it. Whether they are a CEO, a cashier, or a customer with only a single coin to spend, respect is not optional. It is the foundation of this company." The customers nodded in agreement, their eyes fixed on her with admiration. The employees straightened, their backs, hope flickering in their eyes for the first time in weeks. The manager's lips quivered. His excuses had turned to dust in his mouth. There was nothing left to say. The woman took a step closer, her calm gaze pinning him where he stood. "Do you realize what you have done today?" she asked softly. He swallowed hard, unable to answer. "You have humiliated a customer in front of others. You have silenced your employees when they tried to do what was right. And worst of all, you have shown this entire store that leadership here is built on fear, not respect." Her words were not shouted, but they struck harder than any raised voice could. Each sentence fell like a hammer, shattering the fragile wall of arrogance the manager had built around himself. A customer from the back stepped forward, speaking for the first time. "Ma'am, I've been shopping here for years, and I've seen how this man treats people. It's not just today. He has always been like this." The murmur of agreement spread quickly. Other customers nodded, their faces tight with disapproval. One woman added, "I stopped coming here as often because of the way he spoke to me once. I never thought anyone would hold him accountable. The weight of the crowd's voices pressed down on the manager like a stone. His head bowed, his confidence shattered. He tried to speak again, but his voice cracked with fear. Please, I can change. I can do better. The woman regarded him for a long moment. Her eyes were steady, but there was no hatred in them. Only disappointment. Change begins with humility, she said. But humility should come before destruction, not after it. The manager's shoulders sagged. He knew then that his time was almost over. The senior staff member stepped forward once more, her tone respectful but firm. Madam, shall we proceed? The woman nodded slowly. Yes, it is time for accountability. The atmosphere shifted again. The customers leaned forward, waiting to see what justice would look like. The employees stood straighter, hope returning to their faces, and the manager, trembling and pale, realized that the very ground beneath him was slipping away. The revelation was complete. His power was gone, his arrogance stripped bare. What remained was only judgment, swift, unavoidable, and about to be delivered. The store felt like it had been transformed into a courtroom. Every eye was fixed on the manager, every whisper weighed heavily, and every heartbeat seemed louder than before. The customers, once casual observers, now felt like witnesses to a reckoning that had been a long time coming. The manager's hands shook as he gripped the edge of the counter. His chest rose and fell rapidly, but the confidence he had carried all day had vanished, replaced by a cold, creeping panic. He had misjudged the woman completely. What had seemed like a simple test for her had turned into a public exposure of his arrogance, his cruelty, and his failures as a leader. The woman, calm and composed, stepped forward, her presence commanding the room without a single raised voice. This is not about humiliation, she said softly but firmly. It is about accountability. The senior staff member standing beside her nodded. We cannot allow behavior like this to continue. The respect and trust of our employees and customers are the foundation of this company. Today you have shown disregard for both. The manager's throat went dry. Please, he stammered, his voice quivering. I can change. Give me a chance to make this right. I've learned a lesson. The woman's gaze remained unwavering. She did not raise her voice. She did not display anger. Her calmness itself was more powerful than any punishment. Opportunities to make things right require humility, she said. Humility must come before change, not after destruction. See? Crowd leaned in, sensing that the moment for true justice had arrived. Employees held their breath, while customers murmured in anticipation. Even the young cashier, who had witnessed his cruelty before, now stood taller, her hands clenched as hope returned. The senior staff member spoke again, this time with formal authority. Sir, based on your actions today, and the behavior we have observed over time, the company has decided on your position. The manager swallowed hard, his knees weak. His mind raced for a way out, a way to save face, a way to avoid the consequences he had ignored for so long. But there was none. The woman stepped closer, her voice calm, final, and resolute. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as store manager. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some gasped in shock, others in relief. The employees exchanged glances of validation. They had finally witnessed justice, and the toxic force that had ruled over them was gone. The manager's face turned pale. No, this isn't fair, he shouted, his voice breaking. I didn't know. The woman held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Fairness is measured not by ignorance, but by the way we treat others. You chose arrogance over respect, cruelty over kindness, and fear over leadership. This is the consequence. For a moment, the manager froze, realizing the weight of his mistakes. Every cruel word he had spoken, every dismissive action, every moment of misplaced authority had led to this instant. The senior staff member approached him. Please gather your belongings. Security will escort you out. The manager's shoulders sagged. He muttered under his breath, trying to salvage dignity that no longer existed. The employees watched in silence, some satisfied, others merely relieved. The customers nodded, as if justice itself had finally arrived in the form of this decision. The woman turned to the employees, her tone gentle but firm. Let this be a reminder, she said, that respect is earned through actions, not assumed through titles. A company thrives when its leaders honor the people who make it possible, the employees, the customers, and every human being who walks through these doors. The young cashier smiled quietly, tears brimming in her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of hope and pride in the workplace she had once feared. She realized that courage and integrity, even when overlooked, could eventually shine through. The customers began to applaud softly, a ripple of approval spreading throughout the store. The manager, now pale and defeated, was escorted to the door. His arrogance had crumbled completely, leaving only the stark reality of his actions. As the door closed behind him, the atmosphere in the store shifted completely. Relief, admiration, and respect filled the room. The woman remained at the counter for a moment, scanning the faces around her. Every employee, every customer, had witnessed the power of truth and dignity. She smiled, faint but warm. "Let today be a lesson," she said softly, "that leadership is not about authority. It is about respect, integrity, and fairness. And when we uphold these values, we create a place where everyone can thrive." The employees nodded, inspired by her words. The young cashier felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that courage and respect were recognized and valued. The customers, too, left with a story they would never forget. A story of justice, humility, and the quiet strength of a leader who refused to compromise her values. And as the store returned to its normal rhythm, the echoes of what had just transpired remained. A reminder that true power lies not in force or fear, but in honor, fairness, and unwavering integrity. The store had returned to a quieter rhythm, but the echoes of what had just happened lingered in every corner. The customers were still buzzing softly, whispering among themselves about the confrontation they had witnessed. Employees moved with renewed energy, their expressions lighter, their steps more confident. Even the young cashier, who had once stood timid and uncertain, now held her head high, the weight of fear lifted from her shoulders. The manager's absence was palpable. His arrogance, which had once hung over the store like a shadow, was gone. The employees felt a strange sense of relief, but also a lingering awareness of how close they had come to tolerating disrespect and injustice for far too long. The experience was a harsh lesson, one they would carry with them. The CEO remained at the counter, her presence calm but commanding. She had watched the entire ordeal unfold with measured patience, revealing herself only when it was necessary. Her demeanor was composed, but inside she felt a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Satisfaction, because justice had been served. Concern, because she knew that the impact of the behavior had rippled far beyond a single incident. "Thank you," the young cashier said softly, approaching her. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of genuine gratitude. "For standing up and for showing everyone what's right." The CEO smiled faintly. "You've done nothing wrong," she replied. "You acted with integrity and courage. That is far more valuable than any title or position." The cashier nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. She realized that witnessing this moment had changed her. She had always feared speaking up, fearing reprisal or judgment. But now she understood that standing up for what is right is not just brave, it is necessary. The employees gathered slowly around the counter, a mix of admiration, relief, and quiet reflection in their expressions. Some were silent, some spoke, in hushed tones, but all were aware that they had been part of something extraordinary, a moment that would define their understanding of leadership and respect. The CEO addressed them gently, her voice calm but resonant. Leadership is not about control. It is not about fear or intimidation. It is about responsibility, integrity, and respect. Each of you has the power to make this store a better place, not by your rank, but by the way you treat the people around you. Today was a reminder of that. Her words were met with nods, quiet murmurs of agreement, and subtle smiles. The employees felt an unexpected surge of pride, a sense of belonging that they had not experienced before. They realized that their work mattered, that their voices mattered, and that respect was the foundation upon which everything else rested. The customers, still lingering in the store, watched the scene with a mixture of admiration and awe. Some approached to thank the CEO quietly, expressing their relief that someone had taken a stand against abuse of power. Others simply observed, knowing that they had witnessed more than a simple confrontation. They had seen justice and integrity in action. The CEO's gaze swept across the room, settling momentarily on the empty space where the manager had stood. She did not feel satisfaction in revenge, nor did she feel triumph. What she felt was clarity. She had observed, intervened, and ensured that the values she had built the company on remained intact. And in that moment, she knew that leadership was not demonstrated through authority, but through accountability and ethical action. Turning to the employees once more, she added, "Mistakes will happen. People will fail. But it is what we do in response that defines us. Remember this day, not because of the humiliation, not because of the confrontation, but because of the truth that prevailed. Respect, honesty, and courage are not optional. Here, they are our foundation." The employees listened, their expressions a mixture of reverence and determination. Some whispered among themselves, silently promising to uphold the values the CEO had highlighted. Others felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that they worked in a place where justice was not just a word, but a practice. Outside the store, the customers began to leave, but the story they carried with them would not fade. They would recount it to friends and family, describing the quiet, unassuming woman who had walked into her own store and restored respect and dignity, not through anger, but through presence, integrity, and wisdom. Back inside, the young cashier lingered a moment longer, gathering the courage to speak once more. "Thank you for trusting us," she said softly. The CEO smiled warmly. "It is not just about trust. It is about understanding that each of you can make choices that reflect who you are. Choices define character, not titles." The words hung in the air, and the employees absorbed them deeply. They realized that the day had been a turning point, not just for the manager who had been dismissed, but for all of them. They had witnessed firsthand how actions have consequences, how integrity shapes respect, and how courage can transform fear into empowerment. The store resumed its normal rhythm, but it was forever changed. The customers who remained felt a new energy in the space, a sense that the environment was safer, fairer, and more human. The employees carried themselves with pride, their heads held higher than before. And the CEO, observing the harmony she had cultivated, allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. She knew that leadership was a journey, not a position, and today had reaffirmed everything she believed, that true authority is earned through respect, courage, and integrity, and that standing up for what is right, even quietly, can change everything. The story of the confrontation, the revelation, and the swift justice would ripple far beyond the walls of the store. It would be remembered, retold, and admired, not because of anger or revenge, but because it showed the power of truth and ethical leadership. As the CEO finally stepped away from the counter, the employees and customers alike felt the lasting impact of the day. They had seen that respect is not a privilege of title, but a responsibility of every individual. They had seen that courage does not require loud words, but steadfast action. And they had seen, above all, that integrity is the foundation upon which real leadership is built. And so, the store, once ordinary, became extraordinary, not because of what was sold within its walls, but because of the example set, the values reaffirmed, and the quiet power of a woman who reminded everyone that true respect can never be commanded. It must always be earned. If you enjoy these stories, make sure to subscribe to Black Battlers so you never miss the next one. Your subscription gives us the power to bring you even more emotional and inspiring stories. Join the Black Battlers family today.